Alright, hi. Today we're going to be making a You'll See Coriander Amber Ale. This is a partial mash brew, and to do that we'll need two different kettles. With a partial mash, it's kind of a combination between a extract beer and a all grain beer. We're going to be getting about half of our sugars from a mash, and the other half from some dried malt extract. So the first part of this, as I was mentioning with our two kettles, we need to get some water boiling so we can do the first mash in our cooler here. Just a 2-gallon beverage cooler, and these work pretty well for that. Can easily be done in a small kitchen. Obviously this is a pretty small kitchen, so hopefully you don't have one any smaller than this. At any rate, one of the drawbacks to, of course, doing an all-grain brew is that you need some way to heat a large volume of water, usually 5 or 6 gallons all at one time, and then of course large vessels to do your mash in. So this is kind of an alternative to that, and you can have a little bit more control over the flavor of your beer than just doing an extract brew. But of course the drawback is needing extra pot in the fermenter. So let's go ahead and get this water going and then get on to the mash. So we're going to go ahead and boil just some, in this case, distilled water. You can use purified water. You can, of course, just use water out of the tap if you have good water. The water we have here kind of tastes a little funky to me, so I like using distilled or purified. To start off with, we're going to boil about a gallon and a half, a gallon and a quarter for our first mash. And I guess, pardon me, we're not going to boil it. We're going to go ahead and heat that up to about 168, 170 degrees. And then put it in our mash vessel. And that should keep it right at the top end of that, somewhere around 168 or so. Alright, the next thing we're going to be doing here is taking our 4 pounds of grain from the recipe that you saw at the beginning of this, and dumping it into a large grain sack, which we're then going to put inside this cooler as our mash tun. Put this back on here. I went ahead and rinsed this guy out really well, and getting it a little wet also helps catch some of the finer particles, so that this doesn't make quite as big a mess as well, and so much of that dust doesn't get through into the final product. Usually go ahead and just tie this guy off here. Alright. Now we're going to go ahead and set this aside for just a second while we get our water. Attempt this one more time to make sure that we're still at temperature here. And again, we're shooting for a temperature right about at 168 degrees. Alright, we're taking our 168 degree water and we're going to pour it into the cooler here. It's a good idea not to do quite all of it at once. That way, if your grain displaces too much water, it's not going to overflow on you here. And I'm just going to lower the grain bag in here. When we do that, kind of want to do it nice and slowly. Make sure we're poking it so that all of the grain gets nice and wet and gets that hot water into it. And this process is, of course, activating the natural enzymes in the grain and converting the starches into sugars, which our yeast will later ferment into alcohol. So you want to get all of the grain good and wet in here so that we get a lot of alcohol yield at the end. That's pretty good. Set that there. I'm going to pour enough water so that it's just coming up over the top of the grain by maybe about an inch or two. And then real quickly, you want to go ahead and put the lid on. Nice and tight. And it's also a good idea to go ahead and cover this with a towel or something, which I'm going to grab here in a second. And that way you can make sure that your heat is staying nice and constant in here. We're going to go ahead and the recipe calls for 60 minutes in your mash tun. So I'm going to set a timer, get that started, and throw a towel over this, and we'll be back in about 60 minutes here to go over the next step. Alright, so we've got our cooler covered in a towel. It's been about 30 minutes now, so we got another 30 minutes on that or so to wait. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and start our sparge water, which we need to heat up to about 170 degrees. So we're going to get that going, and we'll be right back. Alright, we're just about at our 60-minute mark here. So we're going to go ahead and uncover this. And the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and drain our now malt extract out of here. To do this, you just go ahead and take the top off. Smells nice. Alright. So what I usually do is go ahead and drain a little bit of this out here. And go ahead and pour that back nice and gently over the top of your bag. We're going to do this just a couple times. Go ahead and make sure that we get any of the large particles that may have come through our bag back out of here. And we're kind of using the bag and the whole mass of grain as a giant filter. It's starting to look pretty clear. You probably can't tell from the video, but it's most of the way clear. So we're going to go ahead and empty the rest into our large brew pot. So you just want to go ahead and drain this as much as possible. You don't need to worry too much with this to make sure and get it all. Just go ahead and get most of it drained out. And when we're doing our sparge, that's when we really want to make sure and get every last drop.